Hello, and welcome to Take Control of Your Career. If you are interested in leveling up in your career, you are in the right place. Today, we are joined by Caroline Dowd-Higgins. And Caroline is a career coach, motivational speaker, and host of the Your Working Life podcast. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Lauren, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you have such an interesting career story filled with twists and turns. So I think we need to start there. So talk to us about how you went from being an opera singer to a speaker, career coach, career development expert.
Yeah, it's a rather circuitous path. So thanks for asking. And it really is the foundation of my career and my life now. So nutshell version to keep our audience engaged. I grew up performing and singing, started in the church choir as a kid, the whole 9 yards, and fell in love with performing, and also found out that I actually had a voice and started taking voice lessons early on. Went to college and university and studied music, majored in vocal performance, and then went out into the world of work and actually sang professionally for 10 years. And I'll tell you, it was a great run. I loved that career until it stopped loving me. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, the feast and famine reality is very real in the world of the performing arts. And the feasts were great, although they were few and far between. The famine was more consistent. It's really hard to have a consistent income coming in. And I'll tell you, I didn't expect that. I thought, hey, this is a career, a job like any other. I can sustain it for the rest of my life. I was working in Europe quite a bit and also in the US. And I'll be honest with you and your audience. I had a meltdown, and I remember coming home from a gig in Germany one time, and I said to my husband, I love this, but I can't do it anymore. So I had this moment of, now what, right? I speak for foreign languages. I sing a bunch of operatic roles, kind of a niche market. How do I unpack that and figure out what else I can do? And that was the catalyst for the world career. And now I worked with coaches and had mentors and even sponsors who helped me unpack and figure out, what else do you do well? And it showed me that our path isn't just linear, lots of options out there. And it was the catalyst of my reinvention.
Wow. So what the support that you had on that journey is what has now become your life's work. So a really great story, and also the foundation for your TEDx talk also. So I'll put that little plug out there for you too.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I speak very vulnerably, let's channel Brene Brown about vulnerability, about failure, because it was a really tough thing for me to swallow that. I thought that I would do this for the rest of my life and live happily ever after. And in retrospect, I can go back and look at the wins and the successes and celebrate them and say, hey, I failed forward and I recovered and was resilient and figured out how to do other things. So was I a lifelong opera singer? No. And I had some great successes and some great runs, and have finally learned to celebrate that and move forward and think about the future and celebrate what's coming. So it was a pivotal moment for me. It really was.
I love it. And it's actually the next phase of your career with the career coaching. You actually guide people in terms of thinking about how important it is to have an exit or a growth strategy, even if you're happy in your career. So that's kind of relevant to that part of your story as well. So tell me more about what you mean by a growth strategy or an exit strategy.
I love that you asked about that. So I shared, very candidly that I had this meltdown. Oh my gosh, what am I going to be doing next? That was unexpected. And the reality that I couldn't drive this perfect dream career on my own was, something that I didn't expect. But when I've been working with colleagues and working with clients all over the world, I realized often we hit those roadblocks. So for example, recessions happen, mergers and acquisitions happen in organizations, downsizings happen. A global pandemic is still happening. Who would have thought, right, this time a year and a half ago, that we would still be navigating through this pandemic journey? So there are things beyond our control that often necessitate change. And I believe we need to be ahead of that curve and be ready to say, what do I want next? Whether it is an exit or a growth in this organization or whatever path that you're on. And I think sometimes we get complacent and we get comfortable and we think we don't need to be in planning mode. And I firmly believe, from my experience and as a coach, we always need to be a step ahead thinking, what's next? Because I want you all to be in control of that so it doesn't happen by default.
Yeah, we're so aligned on that, Caroline, because as you know, the name of this show is Take Control of Your Career. It's all about how can you be the one who's being intentional about your next steps rather than giving your power away, which actually is a kind of leads me to my next question, which is about how you talk about being seen and heard and asserting your leadership, no matter what your rank or title may be. And I was actually just talking with a woman who said that when she's with her boss, she doesn't feel like she can speak her mind. And I talk to a lot of women who feel that way in various shapes and forms. So can you tell me more about how we can do a better job of that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. And yes, we are kindred spirits in that. So I cherish your work and I'm grateful to be with you today. You know, being seen and heard is not only a mindset, but there are actions there. And often people in their career feel like they shouldn't speak up until they're in perhaps a pinnacle role or a leadership role that has a title. And I think that's crazy. I think we need to lead without the title. It's not about your title or your rank or your salary. It's about being comfortable in your own skin. And I get it. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. But all of us have a point of view. So let me get really granular. I would encourage you to speak up, to be brave and to be creative, and also listen. Be cognizant of what's happening in your organization or your work environment. And think about, how can I be a solution provider? How can I offer a diverse perspective? No, I'm going to go coachy a little bit here, because I know some of our listeners are more shy or I'm more introverted, and that's not my happy place. And I will tell you, as an extrovert, often I speak and then think, right? So that's not always the best strategy either, right? We need to be conscious of what we're saying. But for the beloved introverts and introspective processors, it's not too late to follow up and have a point of view after the meeting. You can go back to your boss and said, you know, I've thought about this. I've actually slept on it and I took some notes and I'd like to come back and share my ideas with you. So you don't have to do it in the moment, but you absolutely have to follow up.
Yeah, because otherwise we're constantly living in a state where we're giving our power away. And that's never going to get you where you want to go in your career.
It is. And I'll dovetail on that. And I know you're familiar with this quote: power is not given, it's taken. So we all need to take our power and assume it and use it for good.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the other things that you talk about in your book is about getting quiet with yourself. So what do you mean by this and why is that important?
Yeah, so I'm high energy, I'm driven. My husband would say that I'm wrapped tightly, right? I'm just one of those doers, one of those overachievers, good, bad, or indifferent. It's part of my DNA. So I'm learning to meditate, for example. So getting quiet with myself is a practice, and my meditations are very short because I'm a novice. But I have learned that even if I'm walking and I'm exercising or I'm doing something outside, I can still quiet my mind. And I'll tell you how important this is. Often we're so busy with what's happening in our day. And even as we fall asleep, we're thinking of what to do. We don't give ourselves permission to reflect and say, am I happy? Are my values being honored and met? Am I playing to my strengths? We get on that proverbial treadmill and we get stuck in the momentum and the monotony of the day to day. So let me say, this past year of the pandemic was the fastest, slowest year of my life. Like, it blinked by, but every day felt like swimming through molasses. But it gave me some time to self-reflect and think, is this what I want? Is this gratifying me? And all of us need to go back to that very regularly and check in and say, am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I challenged? Whatever is meaningful to you.
Yeah, and I think about that from the perspective of getting clarity on what our next steps are. So you talked about, from your work values, your strengths, are your what are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? Are they aligned? And really taking the time to think through that rather than, like you said, just going through the motions day to day. And then next thing you know, 5 years has passed and you haven't gotten where you want.
Exactly. And I'm going to riff on that a little bit, Lauren, because I work with so many people, well-meaning, awesome professionals who say, well, it'll get better when the kids are in day school, preschool, or it'll get better when I get the promotion, or it'll get better when my mom recuperates from her surgery, right? Whatever the scenario is, that's a very Western philosophy. It'll get better when. And the reality is, why are we waiting for it to get better? Or perhaps someone's in a really awful scenario where it's a toxic work environment, or they're not in the right role, or maybe they have a crummy boss. It happens. So, the crummy situation is real, but the suffering is optional. Why are we suffering, right? There's so much opportunity for us to change that.
Yeah, well, I'll take a shameless self-promotion plug for both you and I, because that's the situation that so many people find themselves in their careers. But if you don't take action, and oftentimes moving forward with a coach is one of those actions that is going to, by definition, move you forward. Otherwise you can just keep on going. And like I said, the years pass by and the kids get out of day school and, you move on, but nothing else has changed.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I think also as women, and I know you've got a beautiful audience that includes women and men, and we celebrate that, but women often take care of other people first, and we don't focus on what we need. And I don't think that's selfish. I think we need to focus on ourselves because it's self-preservation, and we can be better humans, but we can be better to the other people in our world too, if we celebrate what we need.
Absolutely. And give ourselves permission to invest in ourselves, to focus on our careers, to get what we want out of that. So I applaud that perspective. So along those lines, speaking of the women in our audience, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a really big topic these days. I think one of the challenges that I see is that many organizations are all talk and no action, or they're either doing some check the box, or maybe a few years ago, they only did check the box kinds of things, and now they're running into real problems. So you have some ideas about how women in particular can get involved and move the needle to make positive change. So tell us about that.
I do. And I have to say, I am so grateful for the extraordinary women who have taught me this. So I want to honor them and give them a shout out. And they are women of color. And they've said, look, we need your help here, and we need you to stand up. So they've said to me, we need to advocate for more women of color. In this case, we're talking about women to be hired in our organizations. And if, those top 5 candidates come in and they're all white women, let's go back to the resume pool and say, hey, let's be really intentional. Let's honor that. And of course you want the great candidates to rise to the surface, but are we looking through it with a either unconscious or conscious bias lens? Let's go back and honor that we want a certain percentage of those candidates to be BIPOC or people of color. Are there people of color on committees, on events? Be vocal, right? How can we really move the needle by being intentional? And I'll give you an example. I have an awesome colleague who shared an event with me, and she said, this event looks really good, but I'm not going. And I said, well, tell me why. And of course it was a virtual event because we're still navigating this pandemic journey. She said, because all the speakers are white. And she said, this topic resonates for everybody. Why don't they have a single person, be it a male or a female person of color, on that whole roster of speakers? And she's absolutely right. She was absolutely right. And it was a light bulb for me to say, I need to speak up. I need to be really vocal about that in my space so we can have an exponential impact. It's not enough having a D&I committee. It's not enough having a DE&I statement on your website. We need to act.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to, looking at that final slate of candidates, it starts at the very beginning. How did you source those candidates in the first place? Did you go to places where you're more likely to find some of those candidates of color, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, and also, are we intentionally recruiting, right? And it's really, really interesting. The study that's decades old now about how the gentleman throws his hat in the ring if he's got 2 or 3 of the 10 criteria listed for the application, and the woman says, "Oh my gosh, I've got to be 100% ready." We've been hiring men for generations, and I'm not vilifying men. Men are fabulous, but this is truthful. Men have been hired for their potential for decades. We don't do that with women, and we certainly don't do that with diverse candidates. We need to treat them the same way, right? And hire for potential. Smart people that can learn new things and flex new muscles. So that's another criteria when we think about hiring and bringing more diversity into our organizations. And diverse perspectives are great for culture, for creativity, productivity, and efficiency.
Absolutely. This is not a women's issue or a diversity issue or a black, white, or person of color issue. This is a business issue at the end of the day, because the business results are positively affected by having a more diverse set of employees, decision-making criteria, et cetera.
Got it.
Yep, absolutely. So one of the other things that you talk about, especially in your podcast, you talk about everything around how women can love their job and their life. So talk to us about navigating work-life balance, especially for women with aspirations towards the C-suite. So, I see so many women putting in 12, 14, even 16-hour days to just because they feel like that's what's necessary to get ahead. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I will share candidly, I am a recovering workaholic. So it's a slippery slope for me, but it was a reality check for me to understand if I'm on a roll and I'm working so many hours a day and I'm excited and I'm engaged, that's one thing. It's a different thing and not a good thing. I'm there because I want someone else to see me and know that I'm putting in the time, and I want others to recognize that I'm here toiling away. That's the difference. That's the difference between a high achiever and a workaholic. And so I flipped the switch to say, I want to be a high achiever. I don't want to be a martyr and a workaholic. And I'll tell you, some of the things that I am doing in my personal life and that I encourage my clients to do is, number one, ask for help. I don't care if you're in the C-suite, you can still ask for help. That's what smart leaders do. And remember, something that you aren't doing is delegated to someone else and gives them a great opportunity. So you're helping an emerging leader take on more responsibility. But personally, I will tell you that for me, exercise and sleep are non-negotiable. And you and I were chatting before the show. I've gained 3 hours in my day because, at least at present, I'm not doing that round trip commute to get to my office, which is a long distance commute. So during that time, I'm exercising. And I'll tell you, I feel healthier, I feel more vibrant, I'm sleeping better. And I am the person that will say, I've got to go to bed now, because if I don't get 8 hours, I'm not honoring what my body needs. So I want all of you listening to understand that you've got to figure out what your body needs to be healthy and productive, and be unapologetic about it. Celebrate what you need and do it.
And that also goes back to thinking about that clarity piece on, what are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? And how do you make sure that you're honoring both of those and not letting one dictate the other?
Let me say too, though, I get it. You have a little one, sometimes the baby gets up in the middle of the night. Heck, I have a geriatric dog that gets up in the middle of the night, right? And when he's got to go, we got to go. We got to get him outside. So whatever your situation is, I get it. It's not like, the word balance drives me crazy because it's not even keel. Our lives are all roller coasters. There is an up and a down. However, we can focus on the majority of the time, and as much as we have control, to take advantage of that and honor what we need. So I will say, I get it, life happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece to that is just making sure that you're not letting it swing out of control where you don't necessarily feel like you have the ability to affect the direction you're spending your time. And so that's the key, is making sure that you're being intentional around how you're spending your time as well.
Yeah, I think you and I align so much on power and control, and we all have control, but often we relinquish it and we let it go. And that is a very precious thing that we need to hold on to and set our own boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. So in light of that piece of control, one of the things that we haven't been able to control a lot over the last year is just what's going on with COVID and just the whole concept of careers during the pandemic. So one of the things that has received a lot of press is how COVID has affected women disproportionately in the workforce. So give us your thoughts on what women can do to keep their careers on track.
Yeah, the reality is women are the chief household officers, whether they have kids or they're just taking care of the home. And I'm not talking about cleaning necessarily, but I'm talking about the bills and just all of the things that happen in a household. And I'm sure there are some guys out there saying, wait a minute, I pay bills. Great. But I'm sure that your female partner, if that is the case in your scenario, is doing quite a bit. And, there are some sandwich generation women out there who are taking care of kids and elderly parents. So I learned this early on from some amazing women who have been my mentors and sponsors. And they said, look, if there are things that you can afford to pay somebody else to do, like cleaning your house or, taking care of getting the kids to and from school, do it. And I realized that's a luxury for some and not an option for many. But ask your community, ask your tribe, ask your people, your family, how can you help me make this work? Because if we don't ask for what we need at home and at work, that's where craziness happens. And especially during COVID, because so many kids had to deal with digital learning and being schooled at home online, it skewed a lot of women who left the workforce and said, okay, I've got this. And I really have a plea for employers listening, honor these women, right? Think about our collective global workforce if these women take a very long-term hiatus. We need them. We need to honor them in our culture and get them back to work. And I also have a plea for flexibility. We've been doing this for over a year. The calendar on my desk in my office says March 2020, and today's April. So it's 13 months since I have been back in that office. I'm sure there's dust an inch deep on my work desk, but we've proven we can do this. We can be efficient, we can be productive, we can be creative. So I really want organizations to be more mindful about that. And let's let go of the stigma of the pre-pandemic that working from home isn't a good thing. I think it's a great thing. And I think it's important for us to have options.
Absolutely. And this has totally demonstrated that we can get the work done, we can manage the balance, and still it requires just a focus on results rather than, time in the office, which kind of goes back to that work-life balance question. If at the end of the day, we're looking at what's been achieved rather than how much time we're getting that face time, then that is what we're measuring.
And I love that mindset, Lauren, because I think so many organizations now are saying, let's not look at the hours worked, let's look at the outcomes. And I don't care when you do it. You might be a night owl and you might be in your prime time when the rest of us are turning in for the night. Great. Get the work done, work in your personal time clock, but let's not worry about punching that proverbial clock.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's forced us, at least at Impact Group, to really focus on what are the measurable outcomes that we can associate with every role. And that's what we are focusing on. And if every company can look at that, I think we'll be able to maintain a lot more flexibility going forward.
It's a culture shift, and certainly none of us wanted a global pandemic, but that is a silver lining from all this, right? And I think it's one thing that will help many organizations and many professionals moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, Caroline, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. I do also want to make sure that the audience has the chance to hear more about your book. It's This Is Not the Career I Ordered. Tell us where they can find it.
Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate that. So, of course, you can check out my website at carolinedowdhiggins.com. And the book is available on Amazon and all major book retailers. But it's important for you to know that there are two editions, the first edition and the second edition. So get that second edition because it's more current and up to date and has some really cool stuff that the first edition doesn't.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this fabulous information with us and just great insights by a true expert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. What a pleasure.